All right, good morning. Now see, there are those lights again. I can barely see the first row. So I trust everybody's awake and willing in the back today. So again, good morning, and give me a hua. Hua? All right, we have any Army in here? All right. Hey, well, first of all, Jeff, thanks for that great intro. And it is a pleasure to be here in Colorado Springs this morning with you here at the 38th Space Symposium. What a treat and an honor to be here in Colorado Springs. I mean, beautiful day today. My two teams, the Avs and the Nuggets, are in the playoffs, right? So I think we got a game tonight. I think it's the Avs, and the Nuggets won on Sunday. So we're doing good so far, and even looked at the ski resorts this morning a little bit, dreaming that I might be up on the slopes this morning. I think we still got like 60-some inches of snow up in the backcountry. So great day to be in Colorado. Great day to be here, and most importantly, great to be here to talk about U.S. Space Command. And really, I don't think it's any surprise to this crowd that, you know, the importance of space and how actually in the few years that I've been here in Colorado Springs and working in space and missile defense, just a couple of years, you know, how important and much gaining in importance that space is not only to our economic way of life, but to our military operations. And watching the growing competition that we have from, in particular, China as well as Russia, we know today that they work very hard to try to hold at risk those very capabilities that we hold near and dear to our heart when we do joint combined operations around the world. And every piece of our military operation is somehow grounded, no pun intended, in space, whether that's maritime operations, air operations, land operations, cyber operations. So really, it's a great opportunity for me to spend a few minutes, and I see we've got that countdown clock. I feel a little bit like I'm at testimony. You see that clock in front of you, and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with your time. But I'll try to adhere to the clock this morning. But really, I want to spend a few minutes with you and kind of go over, you know, what U.S. Space Command has done since the last symposium, what we are doing today, and what we plan on doing in the future. So 2 years ago, in this room, I declared that U.S. Space Command had reached initial operating capability. And today, we are on track to declare full operational capability later this year. So I want to highlight, really, you saw from the video, what our greatest weapon system is. And I think we all agree. Is that right? Do we agree that our people, our civilians, our military from all the services, our joint team, are the greatest weapon system we have? And so we've showed that at the end. What I wanted to do this morning is talk about right up front a little bit of our greatest asset in U.S. Space Command, and that is the great Americans that work each and every day in the command. And so I can't stress the importance of what they do each and every day. And so really up here you see 4 of our teammates in one team that were recognized just a couple of weeks ago when we had the gala for U.S. Space Command. And I think we actually recognized 18 people. But I'm going to just highlight a couple of them here on this chart. Tech Sergeant Matthew Kiocho from the United States Air Force, working out at CIFSIC out in Vandenberg Space Force Base, deployed to Keen Edge 22, which is an exercise, as the lead of our non-kinetic planning team. His team provided rapid targeting for the Theater Joint Task Force, coordinating over 200 joint electronic warfare fires. Enhancing the multi-domain operations, Matt drove the development of 7 space CONOPS in support of 5 forward-deployed carrier strike groups. Impressive. Sergeant Jeremiah Chitwood, United States Marine Corps, do I hear a hoorah? Part of our Marine Forces Space, or Marine component to U.S. Space Command, was selected to become the first permanent enlisted Deputy Crew Commander for the Missile Warning Center. Jeremiah fulfilled a position usually held by a field grade officer during a 4-fold increase in operations due to the Ukraine crisis. Lieutenant Thomas Logan, United States Navy, Air Force's Space, was pivotal to the success of the historic Artemis I mission. Det-3 Artemis 1 team provided training, logistics, and oversight to 613 multi-agency personnel. His team's command and control was tested by coordinating among 3 DoD ops centers, 2 NASA ops centers, 2 U.S. Navy ships, and 5 aircraft. I think you'd agree that's a massive undertaking in an effort of coordinating 11 different government agencies to execute 3 open ocean events. And there on the right, you see Mr. Nick Foltz out of our J-7 served as a lead for the U.S. Space Command's Tier 1 exercise for Space Century 23, which is upcoming here in a couple of months. He constructed the exercise design and planning and integration for the entire exercise. He has led 4 cross-COCOM exercise conferences and developed 43 associated space scenario events for the command and our allies. At the bottom, you see JTFSD, J-35 Future Operations cut the existing operational planning timeline from 2 weeks to 48 hours, created tactical advantages in our AOR, and extended my decision space, which is always important. The team exemplified boldness by challenging prior risk assessments and paradigms through a first-of-a-kind counter-ISR engagement against an aggressive and dynamic adversary, resulting in a mere 189 exquisite images. And if you attended, who in here attended the opening ceremony last night? Give me around a few people. If you attended, you had the opportunity to see a panel of some great young up-and-coming space professionals. And one of those stars was Victor Vigilotti that you see in the lower left-hand corner of that picture or that chart. He is the Deputy Branch Chief of U.S. Space Command's J-81 and may be here this morning. Vic is doing tremendous work for us, ensuring industry partners are closely integrated and postured to deliver relevant capabilities. Vic shared some of his great insights last night on being a young space professional, in particular in U.S. Space Command. And if you listened, and I did, listen closely, what he said in one of his observations was, you can never stop mentoring. And I think that's good for all of us in the group this morning. Never stop mentoring. Never pass up the opportunity to mentor. So these are just a few of the stars within U.S. Space Command. And these folks are not here today with us. And they're not here today because they're performing missions around the world as we speak and are part of the 18,000 members of U.S. Space Command. And they really represent the best at what we do each and every day in defending the space domain. So let's give them a round of applause. So I think it's important to kind of capture what we've been doing, and I'm going to go back even a little bit farther to when we declared IOC in 2021 to talk a little bit about what we've done, because I think it's important to understand where we've been, where we are today, and where we're going in the future. So as we look at this chart, and I'm a person that likes pictures and images, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what each one of these pictures represent here in the command. And really, going back to 2021 and looking at what we've done in the area of space domain awareness and capabilities, it's been tremendous in how we have been able to leverage the commercial industry to increase our space domain awareness. Because as you know, in order to be able to operate in the space domain, you must be able to see, understand, and characterize in the space domain. And so we can't do all of that by ourselves in the military. We rely on our commercial integration efforts to provide more capability and capacity, and I'll talk about an example of that here in a few minutes. We've also done a lot in the international collaboration area. We signed enhanced space cooperations, MOUs, with the United Kingdom and Canada, and we continue to work with those folks today, and I'll talk a minute about some of those efforts. But this week, we'll sign one of those enhanced space cooperation MOUs with Australia, and we look forward to doing that. We've also in the command done some hard work in terms of capturing what the requirements and the capabilities that we need not only today, but in the future. And so we've had a lot of success in the command in doing that formal process of creating initial capability documents, for example, and getting those into the department's process of satisfying requirements that we have in U.S. Space Command. And we have 4 of those right now and working towards more of those. One is in space domain awareness, as I mentioned earlier, space combat power, joint space C2, and the joint space communications layer. And so these are critical because in order to get the funding, in order for the services to provide capabilities to us, they need to understand what our requirements are. And the command has done a lot of that in the last 3.5 years. The command has also continued to grow. We have 5 service components. I'll talk about our newest one in a second. We've got 3 functional components. The headquarters itself has more than 1,200 folks assigned to that, and those folks are service members, as you can imagine, from all the services. We have great Department of the Air Force civilians within the command. We also have allies and partners in the command. And when you look at the spread of experience that we have in our joint force, all of those service members, and many of our Department of the Air Force civilians are retired military. When you pull all that together, you've got a very broad experience base. It's very diverse. And what does that really mean to us? Well, I call that, quite frankly, the secret sauce of U.S. Space Command. The ability to leverage the joint community, the joint service members that have, in many cases, combat experience in other domains, air, land, sea, cyber, and are able to bring that expertise to bear in what we're trying to do in U.S. Space Command. So the command continues to grow in that, and I think we'll continue to have that great joint team as part of U.S. Space Command. We've also established cells, centers, and teams. We've got joint operations centers, joint fires elements now, JIST teams, which are joint integrated space teams, joint cyber center now, joint intelligence operations center. We have commercial operations cells here in Colorado Springs at JTFSD, as well as out at Vandenberg Space Force Base, as well as in with the command of U.S. Space Command, the headquarters, if you will. And we've also developed and are expanding our academic engagement enterprise. So let me go to the newest component that we have in U.S. Space Command, and that is Air Force's space. So a lot of folks said, hey, General Dickinson, when you stood up U.S. Space Command, you know, there doesn't necessarily have to be an Air Force component because you've got what? You've got a Space Force component, and I do. Space Operations Center, absolutely. But one of the mission areas that we've been given in the Department of Defense is that of support to the human spaceflight support. And the Air Force's space was designated to U.S. Space Command to do that very task. And so we're very excited to have them as part of the team. And really, they've already executed a couple of great missions, and you can see one right there on the upper right where you see the capsule sitting there with the balloons on it. And so that was the Artemis I recovery operations that Air Force Space actually planned and executed with the Joint Force in order to recover the Artemis I capsule. And if you were like me, what'd you do? You watched it on TV, hung on every second, waiting for that to splash down, and I think they said that was a perfect mission. And what we wanted to do is make sure it was a perfect recovery. And so we did, through a joint team of Air Force, Navy folks, and if you looked really closely, you could see that they had an LPD ship off the coast of San Diego that recovered that capsule. And that was a difficult recovery because they had to pull that capsule inside the well deck of that naval ship. And with the seas the way they are, and you can see that I'm an Army soldier, right? So what does he know about sea states? But they do have sea states, and I know that was a very complicated recovery, but we did it because I think it was all about the heat shield, right? They wanted to make sure that the Artemis I, they were able to evaluate the performance of that heat shield as it re-entered the Earth's atmosphere. So interesting. If you look really closely, you can see that boat behind the capsule there. If you blow that up a little bit, or a couple of the other boats that are there, you'll see that that's a joint team of rescue divers between the Navy and the Air Force. So that's a big part. That's a very visible part of what the command does each and every day, and we will continue to do that mission. We'll continue to do that mission for Artemis II, which we believe is in 2024. That'll be a crewed mission. And then Artemis 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Whatever that ending number is, U.S. Space Command will absolutely be there to support that. And we are honored to be able to get to do that on behalf of the nation and in support of NASA and our allies as well. So since IOC, we've also conducted 55 exercises and war games, including our capstone multilateral space exercise called Global Sentinel 22. And you can see at the bottom of that chart a whole bunch of people standing there, and that is that great team that executed Global Sentinel 22. We had 24, 25 nations in our third iteration of that exercise, and why that exercise is so important is because allies and partners are such a big piece of what we do in U.S. Space Command, and that's really how we develop and execute our theory of success that is outlined in the National Military Strategy, National Defense Strategy. And so that's a great opportunity, and I would be remiss if I didn't quote one of our participants in that exercise, and I believe this is from one of our great allies out of the Republic of Korea, where he said, quote, "No single country can face this vast domain. Global Sentinel is the optimal opportunity for generating synergy as we work together with all spacefaring nations around the globe," end quote. And I think that captures very clearly what we all need to be thinking, and we do each and every day, of the importance of our allies and partners and what that brings to bear in terms of being able to coordinate, execute operations in the space domain. So, and from a real world perspective, U.S. Space Command's focus on the war and conflict in Ukraine, it really in support of our NATO's deterrence mission, the command has prioritized many different assets, but in particular satellite communications, where we've provided more than an additional gigabyte of data to support communications across the European continent. And since the beginning of the conflict, U.S. Space Command has also provided more than 11,000 indications and warnings of theater launches to the NATO allies as well as our U.S. partners. So suffice it to say, we're busy, but busy doing good things for folks and units all around the world. And we are breaking new ground in several other areas to stay ahead of the threat and maintain our position of advantage. So, reestablished U.S. Space Command back in 2019, exactly 29 August 2019. So that makes us 3 years and 8 months old. But who's counting? U.S. Space Command is the only combatant command organized for warfighting in the space domain. And while we are the youngest and the smallest by a lot of measures, ours is the largest AOR. So the definition for my area of responsibility and the commands is from 100 kilometers to the edge of the universe. In some areas, I say to infinity and beyond. But I got to tell you that that's a big space to be responsible for, right? No pun intended. And from time to time, I poke at a few of my other combatant commanders who may have thought they had a pretty big AOR. But I think you will all agree in here, that is the biggest AOR we will ever have. But what's interesting, though, is we have the fewest humans that live in that AOR. And so as we sit here today, we've got 7 on the International Space Station, and we have 3 on the Chinese Space Station. A total of 10 people, humans, living in that AOR today. And I won't talk about who else might be out there, too. I get that question from time to time. I will not go on the record giving you any kind of prediction. I had a pretty senior person at one point ask me that, and I said, I'm still counting. No, I'm kidding. So the command really, in all seriousness, we've had great success here over the last a year or so, and that we now have our first ever integrated plan for defending critical space assets and delivering space capabilities to the rest of the joint force. Really a historic event and achievement. We are now able to synchronize effects with other combatant commands to achieve integrated operations in campaigning and contingencies. Our goal is to strengthen the strategic deterrence by providing options that preserve the U.S. and allied competitive advantage while promoting security and stability to ensure conflict does not begin or migrate into the space domain. So that's a big task. So our plan, our concept requires the integration of several operational approaches for its success. And we describe these approaches as our triad of triads concept. I first introduced the triads of triads last August during the SMD symposium. So U.S. Space Command's mission is global, multi-domain, and spans the spectrum of conflict. The first of the triads involves the fusion of space, cyber, and special operations capabilities to generate asymmetrical effects on a global scale across the conflict of continuum. And so this particular triad focuses on integration of space, cyber, and special operations. And so you can imagine that the synergy that you can develop from that by having those different capabilities, concepts, and coming together in one triad that's able to leverage the strengths of each for the betterment of the many. The second triad describes a scalable framework for preserving freedom of action in the space domain. And so this is how we get after how do we not only provide resiliency for ourselves, but also be able to hold competitors at risk. And this is really where we look at the three segments of a space system. The ground system, which comprises of control stations, antennas, tracking stations, launch sites, etc. The space segment, which consists of the physical domain, the spacecraft itself, and all the orbits that they traverse. And then the link segment comprises the signals, frequencies, and bandwidth, and the electromagnetic spectrum that tether ground and space segments. Freedom of action in the space domain requires access to all three of these segments. Similarly, denying freedom of access to an action in the space requires denying access to one or more segments of the adversary's space architecture. As you can imagine, this is a huge effort and one that requires close coordination with the joint force, our allies, and our partners. So the third triad is Space Command's established joint, combined, and partnered approach. And I think that really is almost self-explanatory when we talk about how important it is that we communicate, support, and work with the joint force, as well as the combined force and our commercial partners. And so really, we look at that as a team of teams working together. And then finally, you see in the center there, Mission Command. So with all of this, how do you tie that all together? How do you empower the war fighters that are within those triangles, if you will, the triad of triads? You do that through Mission Command. Mission Command really creates an environment and a climate where we instill and encourage disciplined initiative with decentralized execution. Disciplined initiative and decentralized execution. You would be surprised how young some of these folks are that actually do what I just described in those three, in the triad of triads. Folks that are early 20s, mid 20s, folks highly educated in STEM, great leadership attributes, things of that nature that gives us the advantage over our competitors. And that's because we encourage disciplined initiative and decentralized execution. So, speaking of the joint, combined, and partnered approach, I want to give you a few examples, and I think I've got 1:20 left, just to highlight what we're doing, quite frankly, with our allies and partners. Today, we have 169 space situational awareness sharing agreements, call those SSAs. That is a phenomenal number, 169 and growing. Of the 169, we have 33 nations and international organizations, 129 commercial companies, plus 7 universities. We have embedded and joint integrated space teams that I mentioned earlier in all 10 combatant commands, where each of the combatant command headquarters has representation from U.S. Space Command in their respective headquarters that do operations, intelligence work, as well as planning. And we have seen those teams grow in competence, capacity, and are really making a contribution not only to us at U.S. Space Command, but the respective combatant commands where they are assigned. Our interagency partnerships benefit also from some of our work here with our national agency representatives or our NARs that we have that are working in our intel community in our J2 that bring us great integration with the broader intel community within the Department of Defense and really the whole of government. We're also working very closely with the Department of Commerce, just signing an MOU in December of 22 that helps us do the planning so that they are able to stand up a space traffic management service for the government, and we look forward to that, and we'll be working with them this week. So really, I could go on, and I think I've actually run out of time. But there's one thing I just wanted to mention very quickly is one of the concepts we're looking at right now, which we call the dynamic space operations, and what that means to the command. So as you can see, we've got a rendering here of a couple of satellites that do on-orbit missions for us today. And what we're looking at very closely is how do we do that on a sustainable basis? How do we ensure that our satellites that we have the ability, or more importantly, are not constrained by some of the limited resources that we currently have on these satellites? Examples of that would be battery life, maybe fuel, maybe some other things. But it's important, as we do in other domains with respect to operations, that we don't limit ourselves by those types of resources, that we have the ability to plan as we need to do the operations that have been given to us, using the tactics that we have developed, and not limited to the fact that we may not have enough of those resources on board, and that they're able to be replenished. And so we're looking very closely at that. And again, I go back to what the command has done earlier with ICDs and developing requirements and demand signals. This is one area that we're looking very closely at, and we actually went out to the commercial industry not too long ago, I think it was June of last year, with some requests for information on how they can maybe satisfy or help us with these types of activities. So that's something I do believe my Deputy Commander John Shaw will talk a little bit about this in his remarks this week. But this is absolutely a concept that we're looking at very, very closely. And it will be very important as we look to the future in terms of how do we do our protect and defend mission in that big AOR that I just talked to you about earlier. And finally, let me just talk to the future for just a minute, going to the next chart, and just really kind of looking at what we see in the future in terms of our competitors in space and developing capabilities that may or may not be considered, or in some cases considered, dual use. And this is a rendering of the Chinese SJ-21. And this is an event that's interesting, should be interesting to all, and that the demonstrated capability of a satellite to go out, grab a hold of a defunct Beidou satellite, which is their equivalent to our GPS satellite, maneuver with it, take it out 300 kilometers past the geo orbit, drop it off, and then come back. And so while that, that's a pretty interesting concept that was demonstrated, we just need to all be aware that they're continuing to develop those types of capabilities that potentially could hold our assets at risk. So we do that each and every day in U.S. Space Command. We watch it. One of my priorities is understanding the competition, and that is very fundamental to what we do. Incidentally, this particular event was captured or observed and recorded by one of our commercial partners that we work closely with in our JCO. And so that just demonstrates to me the importance of the commercial partnerships that we have. It demonstrates to me the capabilities that they have. And really, when we observe things like that, using those types of capabilities, we're more open to talk about what we're seeing. And I think everybody in here, we need to be understanding of what that is today. All right, so finally, I think now I'm like a few minutes over. I just want to say, first of all, thank you for having me today. Our ability to maintain stability, security in space depends upon our greatest asset, which is our people. Our greatest weapon system is our people. And really, I'm very proud of the opportunity to command this great organization. We're on our way to FOC, and that will be a milestone that will be very, very important to not only the department, but the country as a whole. So again, thank you very much for having me today, and it's been an honor. Thank you.